Good morning, and welcome to today's State and Federal Program Directors Meeting. I'm Adrienne Balcazar, and I'd like to introduce the LCAP State and Federal Programs Unit, starting with Helen Choi,
Good morning, everyone.
Laurel Estrada,
Good morning.
Augustine Garcia,
Good morning, everyone.
Rachel Garcia,
Good morning.
Anita Lomeli,
Good morning.
and Christiana Park.
Good morning, everyone.
Also joining us is Susanna Mendoza.
Good morning.
And I'm going to introduce our guest presenter today, Dr. Kotke.
Good morning.
To access today's presentation, we ask you to click on the link in the chat. This will take you directly to the slides. If you do use the link at the top of this, at the bottom of the slide, this will also take you to our Canvas page, and the presentation can be accessed through the icon as shown here, as well as the agenda and the resources that we will be posting, and those that have already been posted. Today's topics on our agenda will be the homeless program. We'll also talk about the cash management data collection, the ESSA overview of school supports, specifically with the CSI, TSI, and ATSI. We have our FPM update and looking at the CE7 and the discipline practices. We also will be covering the comprehensive school safety plan, the Proposition 28 updates, and our LCAP updates, looking at the timeline and next steps. As usual, please place your questions in the chat box and we will answer any simple questions if we can, and we will follow up with written responses in a Q&A that will be emailed to each of you. We are recording today's training and we'll be posting this on our website. And now I will turn it over to Dr. Kotke, who will share about the homeless program.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much again for this amazing team for allowing me to join you today. I am Dr. Jennifer Kotke. I'm the Homeless Education Project Director for the Los Angeles County Office of Ed, and I just wanted to take a few moments to kind of remind and update about a few things. We can go ahead and move on to the next slide there. I just want to do some quick grounding. I know many of you probably already are very familiar with the McKinney-Vento Assistance Act, which has actually been in place for a long time now, 1987. It was originally passed. And we wanted to remind, again, these student population are lacking a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residency. They are students who meet a federal definition and do have significant protections, both federally and in the state of California, as California has also passed a number of state ed codes tied to this particular population. But this is the beginning of what we call the U.S. Code 42. And again, it starts out with students who are lacking that fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residency. That includes, and we can move on to the next slide, all of the definitions that come with our CalPADS verbiage as well. And so we just remind when you're doing your coding for your students or whoever is coding for your students from your housing questionnaire, they should be using a base code of 191. And then each of these respectively have their own numbers. We have 100, which is our sheltered families, our domestic violence families, our transitional housing program families. We have 110, which is our students living temporarily in hotels or motels due to lack of adequate accommodations. And we just remind that these hotels are not your typical hotels. They're oftentimes very, very difficult spaces and places to live. And usually families are there with a voucher or maybe week by week, often due to bad credit or concerns around filling out applications due to maybe their immigration status. We also have Doubled Up, which is our 120 status. These are students temporarily sharing the housing of friends or relatives, or maybe people they don't even know, due to a loss of housing or economic hardship or similar reason. This is our largest population in LA County. It's about 81% of our 61,000 identified K through 12 students. And one of the pieces to keep in mind about Doubled Up is that we find that this is our most difficult population to identify. And oftentimes we get a lot of questions about our doubled up population. So, and then our unsheltered population is, as it sounds, it's our 130 code. These are students living in abandoned buildings, campgrounds, vehicles, inadequate trailer parks, bus and train stations, substandard housing, abandoned in hospitals. We see families who live in storage units because they can afford storage units better than they can afford an apartment or even a hotel. And then it could include families who may be living in the back of U-Haul vans. We see lots of really creative processes our families do to make sure that they're housing themselves. So again, these are additional verbiage. So you've got lack of fixed, regular, and adequate, sheltered, unsheltered, doubled up, hotel, motel. And our last part of the definition, as a reminder, is our unaccompanied homeless youth population. And these are children or youth who meet the McKinney-Vento definition of homelessness. So they lack a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residency. And they may be doubled up, unsheltered, hotel, motel, or doubled up. And they're not in the physical custody of a parent or guardian. That's really important to keep in mind that both pieces need to be a part of this definition. We do remind in the federal legislation there is no age limit on this particular population, and we have every once in a while find a little one that may actually qualify as an unaccompanied homeless youth. So those are our base of our definitions there. We can move into the next slide there. Just as a reminder, we have a whole set of pieces that fall under the Consolidated Application and Reporting System that talks about homeless education. So we just want to take a few minutes to remind about this. The release dates here for spring release and winter release are present below. And we actually just tied up our initial certified deadline for the CARS, the winter release there. And so we do want to remind that if you are responsible for CARS in any way, or you are connected to CARS, to make sure that you're working with your homeless liaison to respond to the question in the CARS application, because these are our accountability tools. And these also potentially drive our federal program monitoring from the California Department of Ed. So we do want to make sure that the work of the homeless liaison is really well represented in the CARS reporting. So we can move on to the next slide, and we'll talk a little bit about the pieces that sit in there. So in the spring release, there is a page titled Homeless Education Policy Requirements and Implementation. And in that, there are a number of pieces that pop up, including the homeless liaison's contact information, their FTE, and also information about their Title I Part A reservation amounts and the activities provided with these funds. Over the last couple of years, one of the things that has happened is not that we have not paid close attention to the Title I Part A reservations, but we have had American Rescue Plan funding. That money has since left us over about a year and a half now, and we are back to really dependent on Title I and any grants that are received. Just to make a notation, in LA County alone, there is only 15 EHCY, or the Education for Homeless Children and Youth grants. There is only 15 recipients. So the rest of our 450 LEAs will be completely dependent on Title I if they are Title I schools, and if not, they will have to revert to using general funds to support this particular population. So can we move on to the next slide there? And then in the spring release, we just remind that the homeless education policy date is asked for. There is a request for training of various stakeholders. And actually, one of the things that was recently removed is the poster dissemination is no longer on there. So that's not something you have to worry about, which is good. It reduces the number of things we have to ask about, but it also limits it limits our FPM to a very few pieces, which we want to do make sure that we answer them correctly or in a positive manner. It's important for the LEAs, as I mentioned, to work with the homeless liaisons to fill out those CARs. And there's some information there about the CDE Consolidated Application website, which I'm sure you may be familiar with. And we can move on to the next slide there. So one of the things that does happen is that CDE analyzes the data annually, and they actually have been asking us as county offices to disseminate technical assistant letters. So we actually send out letters to all of our LEAs in LA County, talking with them about maybe their board policy not being updated, maybe possibly their funds for Title I were not well established, nor were they well expended, and then also connecting around various stakeholder trainings. And so we do reach out related to those particular topics. One of the other pieces that we do see on the most recent CARs is the housing questionnaire, which is there's a number of questions that are asked about the housing questionnaire. And so that's another piece that's also asked about and needs to be responded to correctly. So you can go ahead and move on to the next slide there. So one of the things we do encourage our LEAs to do, especially our homeless liaisons, as they're working with our Title I staff, is to make sure that the funds for homeless education are sufficient for meeting the needs of the homeless children and youth within the LEA. So one of the things is just to ask about, is the LEA using these funds? And if not, why? Are they comparing these funds to academic outcomes? And then there are various ways to determine how to best set an allocation. One of them is possibly to do what we call a per pupil amount of reservation. That is one type. One of the things more recently we've been talking about is yes, a per pupil allocation, but you also may want to consider on top of that is adding a healthy reservation for transportation because transportation is so expensive, particularly for our population. So another thought to consider when working through your Title I related funding. And we'll move on to the next. Thank you. Who has or has not participated in some sort of educational training within the LEA? And does the homeless liaison need to create a professional development plan? We have lots of tools around how to go about doing that. So if you're not seeing trainings happening, please ask your homeless liaison when those trainings are occurring. And if they need any support or you would like any support from us about how to develop those professional development plans, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. We also want to remind about board policies and both the BPs and the ARs, asking about when they were last updated. So it's important to keep in mind that they must be actually updated within 3 years of the current year. More recently, that was legislation that was passed. So this is actually a little bit of an older slide here, and I think I forgot to pull that out. So one of the things to keep in mind is that when the Every Student Succeeds Act was authorized in 2016, LEAs needed to change their policy, but most recently, Assembly Bill 408 has reminded LEAs that their board policies now need to be updated within 3 years of the current year. So we do have some very old board policies out there. So please visit those board policies and make sure they're updated within 3 years of the current year. And you may be hearing from me as far as if they are not. So just monitoring funding is making sure something to keep in mind is that we have our pulse on what's happening with funding at both the state and federal level. We have been monitoring both the EHC and Title I, which are both federal funding. So they are appropriation bills that are sitting up there in the federal. We've been watching them for quite some time. We're hoping possibly they may be voted on this week. It's still a mystery kind of to see what happens, but they are there. It does look pretty positive as far as the appropriation packages for EHC and Title I. We do also want to let you know that we partner with our Schoolhouse Connection partner, who is actually sitting in DC, and they do a great job of watching what's happening with funding. They offer out federal policy updates, and we're just waiting to see that all of that comes through. So I don't know if anybody has any questions for me. I really do appreciate the time today just to kind of pop in and discuss what's happening. I do see a comment. Oh, and yes, Melissa Schoonmaker, amazing. Yeah, she's my boss and still around. So if you ever want to speak with her, she's still here. So, but yes, if you have any questions, you're welcome to drop them in the chat box. And then thank you again today for the time. I'll hang out for a few minutes. I'll drop my name and information in the chat. So if you need to reach out directly to me, you're welcome to do so. And thank you again. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Dr. Kotke. I had a question before I continue, and that is, did you or do we see an uptick in numbers of students experiencing homelessness due to the fires? And because I think when the reports were done for numbers of those students, it was prior to the fires. And so I was curious as to now that we're on, a year forward, is there an increase in that?
So we, interestingly enough, last year we did capture some of those numbers. What we're finding is sometimes what happens is that we see an increase in one space, but a decrease in another. And so if you recall too, we had a lot of immigration type pickups of families starting later towards last year. So we did see an uptick in our fire-related families, but then we saw issues with a downtick due to losing families or families not wanting to be identified as McKinney because of their immigration status. So we work with our LEAs a lot around language and helping our families know everything we do is confidential. We do not, take any information related to immigration status at our school sites, but it's still a fear for our families. So we slightly increased a little bit from last year. So I think we were at like 61 400, and I think we're at like 61 600, and those are K through 12. I just remind you, it's K through 12. We are also required to collect preschool age students. So when you really look at the preschool age, in addition to our K through 12 systems, we're talking more about 64 to 65 thousand identified within just LA County alone. So yeah, yes and no. And one of the things about the fire that we know is that fires in communities, we monitor a lot that's happened over the years in places like Paradise and El Dorado. We have really close relationships with our counties across the state, and the rebuild process, it takes a very long time. So as we continue to rebuild and families continue to struggle, we do anticipate that we'll see those numbers potentially climb from our fire victim families, but it may be a little bit hard to tell exactly because we get information about their status, but we don't always know why the status has been established. So, but great question. Thank you so much.
Thank you. That was very helpful. And I hope that's helpful to the districts. If there's anything that they can do to assist these students, definitely reach out to Dr. Kotke, and, we're in this together. So thank you so much. Okay. So we have a friendly reminder regarding the Federal Cash Management Data Collection, known as CMDC. There are 4 reporting periods for the CMDC, and the deadline for the next reporting period is coming very soon on January 31st. Remember that LEAs must submit cash balance data each period in order to be eligible to receive the next scheduled payment. The data must be submitted by midnight on the reporting deadline, and the CDE does not accept late submissions. Just a little refresher, if you're new to this system, the CMDC system is a web-based data collection application for LEAs to report federal cash management data for federal programs under ESSA. LEAs receiving Title I, II, III, and IV are required to report the cash balance for each of these programs on a quarterly basis to the CDE through the CMDC system in order to receive their apportionments for these programs. Federal regulations require that recipients of the federal funds minimize the time elapsing between the receipt and the expenditure of federal programs. And the CMDC system provides the CDE with the data needed to make apportionments based on the LEA's cash balance, as reported and required by the regulations. Only one CMDC report is submitted each quarter, and the CMDC report will have a separate line to report the cash balances for each of the programs. And the program and lines shown for the particular LEA's CMDC will correspond to the programs that the LEA is receiving funding for. And this report is usually completed by the fiscal office. So if you're new on the program side, please make sure you contact and you're working closely with the fiscal office, because this is not connected to the CARS and the CONAP. So you want to make sure that you submitted your CARS and your CONAP in the winter release, but you also have this other fiscal requirement that is done on a quarterly basis. So again, we want to make sure that you are in close working communication with your fiscal office. The CMDC is important. You might ask why. And so it's because the CDE will use the reported cash balance to determine the apportionment to release in each reporting period. The apportionment will be equal to 25% of the LEA's annual program allocation minus the cash balance that it reports for that period. The calculations will be done for each of the programs. And the data submitted in the CMDC system does not affect how program allocations are calculated, just only how much of the LEA's total allocation that will be paid each quarter. The CDE sends out apportionments approximately 1 month after the closing day of the preceding reporting window. So if an LEA does not submit a CMDC report for that specific reporting period, then the CDE will not apportion funds to that LEA for that period, and the LEA will have to wait until the next reporting period to submit the CMDC data in order to receive the next apportionment. So it's also important to note that if the cash balance is zero and there's been no spending, then the CMDC report still has to be submitted, but you need to include that zero balance in order to receive an apportionment for that period. And the bottom line with the system is if you aren't spending your money, then you won't be getting more. And again, that's to safeguard for like huge carryover and it's not being spent on the kids. And so again, making sure that everyone is aware of that. And then we have here for your reference, we've provided the login, the logon steps, and also we provided the links for you if you would like to be on the cash management listserv, the CDE webpage, and we've also included the link for the categorical allocation and audit resolution office if you want to contact them. And so thank you. And I will now turn it over to Anita.
Okay, thank you, Adrienne. So as we now move into the Every Student Succeeds Act School Supports, please note that during this SFP meeting, we will be providing an overview. Knowing that this topic can be very comprehensive, we decided to give you the most time-sensitive and important pieces of information today. But know that we will be offering an in-depth training in March, and we are always here to support you. So under the Federal Every Student Succeeds Act, also known as ESSA, California is required to determine school eligibility for support and assistance. And these determinations also include charter schools. There are 3 support determinations in a 3-year eligibility cycle. Year 1 of the 3-year cycle began in 2023-24 school year when California made ESSA school support determinations for comprehensive support and improvement, also known as CSI, and additional targeted support and improvement, also known as ATSI, following the publication of the 2023 dashboard. In 2024 and 2025-26, and 24-25 and then 25-26, California made ESSA school support determinations for targeted support and improvement. So what does all of the information that I shared in the previous slide look like? And we hope that this graphic helps to visualize that understanding. So in year one, all schools in California were evaluated by the state, and from that, there were schools that became eligible based on the dashboard data for CSI and ATSI. That year, those were the only two determinations. No determination meant that your school was no status. In year two, based on the 2024 dashboard, schools in CSI could exit or remain CSI. Schools in ATSI could exit or remain ATSI. No schools could be newly determined to be CSI or ATSI eligible. The front door for CSI and ATSI was closed. You could only stay or exit. All other schools without a previous ESSA determination were evaluated to see if they were eligible for TSI. You could remain CSI and ATSI because you did not meet the exit criteria, but TSI was the only new ESSA determination in year two. The same holds true for year three, based on the 2025 dashboard. Schools are either CSI or ATSI because they have not met the exit criteria since 2023, or they are TSI because they are either newly determined to be or they continue to meet the criteria from the 2024 dashboard. Another scenario could be that they met the exit criteria for CSI or ATSI, but now they meet the criteria for TSI. All this being said, please note that a school can only ever have one ESSA determination at a time. Now, looking forward to next year, it will be the first year in another 3-year cycle, and schools that do not meet CSI and ATSI eligibility will be identified. So with all these ESSA determinations, you're probably wondering if any of your schools have a determination of CSI, TSI, or ATSI, or better yet, no status. In this case, having no status is a great status to have. The ESSA data file was released on December 17, 2025, right before winter break. The link to the file is on this slide and also, I believe, in the chat. And the data file will list all the schools in California. Remember that the ESSA determinations will be that a school remains CSI or exits CSI, remains ATSI or exits ATSI, remains TSI or enters TSI for the first time this year. A school that exits ATSI or CSI can be determined to be TSI this year. Having no status is possible too. That's the one we want. And I know that it's not that I sound confusing, but this can be very confusing. The 2025 Dashboard Technical Guide is a great resource to have as it explains the ins and outs of the ESSA determinations with examples. The link is provided to you here on the slide and in the chat. So now, how many ESSA determinations, what does that look like across the state? Remember that CSI has two subsets, low graduation rate and low performing. For CSI low graduation status, 19 schools exited across the state. For CSI low performing, great news, 97 schools exited. For ATSI, 366 schools exited. And for TSI, remember that this year, schools could meet TSI eligibility. Schools that could enter TSI could be ones that had no status last year, or schools that exited CSI or ATSI, only to now meet the criteria for TSI with the 2025 dashboard. TSI school determinations increased by 334 schools. But all in all, there are more schools this year that have no ESSA determinations, even with less schools overall in California. We are all heading in the right direction with efforts from school and district staff making a positive difference for students. So once you have taken a look at the data file, or perhaps you already have, and you know if any of your schools have been identified with an ESSA determination, now it's time to delve into the specifics and the requirements for each. This slide is intended to provide you with an at-a-glance view of the 3 determinations. This also can provide you an efficient way to see the similarities and the distinctions amongst the 3 as you plan and implement the requirements. For example, for ATSI and CSI, you'll see that eligibility determinations are made once every 3 years, whereas with TSI is determined in the non-CSI and ATSI years. TSI and ATSI focus on particular student groups, while the focus for CSI is school-wide. LEAs are required to notify their TSI and ATSI eligible schools, while it's the state that notifies the LEAs with CSI schools. All 3 determinations require a plan, with ATSI and CSI also requiring a plan that identifies resource inequities. And of the 3 plans, only CSI has funding available to the school. It can be much to remember all of the various specifics for each determination, and we hope that this graphic helps. So now let's take a deeper look at CSI and let's walk through the key planning requirements, which apply to all LEAs eligible for CSI, whether or not they plan to apply for the ESSA Section 1003 School Improvement Funds. The first step in CSI planning is collaboration. LEAs must work with their educational partners to develop and implement a CSI plan. This plan must be informed by all state indicators, including how students are performing against state-determined long-term goals. Also, a school-level needs assessment must be conducted in order to uncover the root causes of eligibility. The CSI plan must also include evidence-based intervention strategies and/or activities that directly address the school's needs. These interventions must have proven success in improving student achievement. Another key requirement is identifying and addressing resource inequities. This might involve reviewing LEA and school-level budgets. And one important question to ask during this planning is, what additional resources does this school need to improve student outcomes beyond what is already being provided to all of the schools? And finally, CSI plans for the 26-27 school year must be fully developed and approved at the local level. To ensure students have a full year of support, the plan must be ready for implementation no later than the first day of the 26-27 school year. The goal is to ensure that every school identified for CSI has a strong data-driven plan in place to drive improvement and success for students. CSI has 6 categories of allowable uses. They are building capacity for your staff, collaborating with your educational partners, using funds to support the school in conducting a thorough needs assessment and root cause analysis, using data and outcomes to monitor and evaluate improvement efforts, selecting and implementing an evidence-based intervention strategy or activity, and reviewing, identifying, and addressing through the implementation of the CSI plan resource inequities. Now, as the state has conducted FPM reviews of CSI schools, they have compiled a list of disallowable uses of CSI funds. They are not allowed to be used for food or meals, purchase of furniture, incentives, transportation, field trips, athletic equipment, or building construction and maintenance. And also very important, no CSI funds can be expended at or on behalf of a non-CSI eligible schools. No Robin Hoods allowed. And additionally, as you make plans for the funds, remember that CSI funds cannot be used to hire permanent staff. Now, as you work through the requirements of the CSI plan and you develop a plan with an end in mind of improving student outcomes, it's always a good idea to have the ESSA determination exit criteria at the forefront. This way, when we backwards plan, we can be strategic in what we're aiming to accomplish. So let's review the exit criteria for CSI. Schools identified for CSI low graduation rate can exit if their 3-year combined 4- and 5-year graduation rate reaches an average of 68% or higher. Schools for CSI low performing status must meet both of the following. They must no longer meet any of the original CSI low performing entry criteria, which includes multiple red indicators, and they must show improvement in change on at least one state indicator that was red on the previous dashboard. Schools that do not meet these 2 criteria will remain in CSI status. CSI eligible schools are the only ones who qualify for funding. The application for funding can be found on GMARK and is due on January 31st, which is Saturday, by 5 p.m. If you haven't already done so, you probably want to submit the application by tomorrow. And whether or not you're going to be accepting the CSI funds, all LEAs with schools identified for CSI must submit an application. Now moving on to TSI and ATSI eligible schools, here are the requirements for the LEA. Each LEA must notify the school of its TSI or ATSI designation, including which student groups is consistently underperforming. The notification can be via email or any other way, but be sure to have documentation of the notification, as this will be required evidence during an FPM review for school support and improvement. LEAs must approve the TSI and ATSI plan and monitor the implementation of the plan at the school site. At the school site, there are requirements for TSI and ATSI. Each TSI and ATSI school must develop and implement a school-level plan to improve outcomes for each student group that was the subject of notification. Collaborate with educational partners, and integrate the TSI or ATSI plan into the SIPSA or an alternate plan that meets federal planning requirements. For single school districts and charter schools only, you may integrate the TSI or ATSI plan into the LCAP if you're using the LCAP as your SIPSA. TSI and ATSI plans have requirements as well. The plan must be informed by all state indicators, including how students are performing against state-determined long-term goals. The plan must also include evidence-based intervention strategies and/or activities that directly address the student needs. And these interventions must be targeted, evidence-based success strategies to improve student outcomes. Also, TSI and ATSI plans must be approved by the LEA, and they should be ready to be implemented no later than the first day of the 26-27 school year. The goal is to ensure that every school identified for TSI and ATSI has a strong, data-driven plan in place to drive improvement and success for its students. An additional requirement for ATSI eligible schools is that their plan must also identify resource inequities and address them, and include a review of LEA and school level budgets. So whether you have questions regarding ATSI, TSI, or CSI, or you just need some time to process this information, please save a spot on your calendar for an in-depth and comprehensive training coming up in March. Our unit will be joining the Accountability and Data Literacy Unit to provide you a training completely dedicated in full to these federal school improvement determinations. And up next is Rachel.
Thank you, Anita. And good morning, everyone. So in this next section, we just have some reminders and updates regarding the Comprehensive School Safety Plan, as there have been several new requirements that have been added over the past few years. So basically, California Education Code requires every kindergarten through grade 12 school, and that includes public and public charter schools, and also community and court schools, to develop and maintain a comprehensive school safety plan that's designed to address campus risks, prepare for emergencies, including medical emergencies, and create a safe and secure learning environment for students and school personnel. And additionally, the Education Code, it requires that all school staff be trained on the components of the school safety plan. And so this means that the updated school safety plans, they should be reviewed with all certificated and classified staff, as well as practiced regularly by all staff. And so requirements related to comprehensive school safety plans can be found in Education Code sections 32280 through 32289.6. And so, as I mentioned, there have been several changes to the education codes related to these safety plans and many new requirements added over the past couple of years. And so, for example, on this slide, this language here, it's directly from Education Code 32280. But if you notice the language that's in red font, that's new language that was added to the Ed Code this year and last year. So as you all know, the School Site Council is responsible for the development of the Comprehensive School Safety Plan. But it's also important to note that the School Site Council has the option to delegate this responsibility to a School Safety Planning Committee, as long as the School Safety Planning Committee meets composition requirements that are specified in Ed Code. And so that committee would need to include the principal or his or her designee, also one teacher, one parent whose child attends the school, one classified employee, and then any other members if desired. And so also it's important to note that if a school is not required to have a school site council, so for example, your non-Title I schools, then this responsibility would also have to be fulfilled by a school safety planning committee made up of the members that I just indicated. Now, when developing or updating the school safety plan each year, the School Site Council or the Safety Planning Committee is also required to consult with the representative from a law enforcement agency, a fire department, and then also other first responder entities. And then if there's any updates made to the plan throughout the school year, then those updates must also be shared with those entities. Also, if a school district has less than 2,501 students, the district has the option to develop one district-wide comprehensive school safety plan that's applicable to each school in the district. And so in that case, the district-wide comprehensive school safety plan, it would be developed by the district rather than a school site council or a school safety planning committee. Now, as a reminder, the school safety plan, it's an annual requirement. And so schools must update and adopt the school safety plan by March 1st of each year. Prior to adopting this plan, the school site council or the safety planning committee must present the plan at a public meeting at the school site, and this is to allow for public opinion regarding the plan. And this may occur at a regular parent meeting. There are also specific notification requirements in Ed Code that indicate that the school site council or the school safety planning committee must notify in writing specific persons or entities, if available, of this public meeting. The plan must also be submitted to the school district for approval. And now keep in mind that there's no required deadline in statute for the school district to approve the plan. However, the CDE recommends that plans be approved by the school district at the next board meeting after adoption of the plan, or by the school as soon as practicable before October 15th. And school districts and COEs are required to notify the CDE by October 15th of each year of any schools that have not complied with the Comprehensive School Safety Plan requirements that are specified in Education Code 32281. Another important reminder is that the approved plan must be readily available for public inspection if requested. And so some considerations for this might be to include posting it on the school or district website, or also maintaining a binder with the copy of the plan and any related materials at the school site administration office. However, how you make the plan available for public inspection, that's a local decision. And then it's also important to keep in mind that any sensitive tactical response information that should be redacted and not made available to the public. Now, there are many required components that must be included in the school safety plans, including several new components. And so you can find everything that's required to be included in the plan in Education Code 32282. And so everything listed on this slide, as well as the next slide, these are components that have been required to be included in the plans for several years. And so although these components are not new, there have been some changes to the language in Education Code for the first component that's listed here. So previously, the Ed Code indicated that the safety plans must include assessing the current status of school crime. And per Senate Bill 848, the word school has been removed from that Ed Code. And so now this component, it includes assessing all crime, so not just school crime, committed on school campuses and at school-related functions. Additionally, there are also some new requirements related to the child abuse reporting procedures that were added this year. And so we'll be taking a closer look at that in a few slides. So again, here we see a continuation of those required components. And so again, these are the requirements that have been in place for some time. And so I'm not going to read through all of them so that we could focus on some of those new requirements. So next, we want to highlight several required components that were recently added to Education Code 32282. And so the first one, as a result of Senate Bill 323, there were several new requirements that were added related to disaster procedures and adaptations for students with disabilities. And so, for example, disaster procedures, they must now include adaptations for students with disabilities in accordance with the Federal Individuals with Disabilities Education Act and also Section 504 of the Federal Rehabilitation Act of 1973. Now, per Senate Bill 671, another recently added requirement is that the school safety plan must include procedures to assess and respond to any reports of any dangerous, violent, or unlawful activity that's being conducted or threatened to be conducted at the school, or at an activity sponsored by the school, or on a school bus serving the school. The next one is a result of Senate Bill 10. And so the school safety plan, it must include the development of a protocol in the event that a pupil is suffering or is reasonably believed to be suffering from an opioid overdose. And so this requirement, it applies to schools serving students in grades 7 through 12. The last recently added one that we see on this slide is a result of Assembly Bill 1858. And so if a school safety plan includes procedures related to active shooter drills, then there are specific procedures related to the drill that the school must implement. And so, for example, one requirement is that the school must provide the ability for parents or guardians to opt their child or children out of these drills. And so all of these components, as I mentioned, they were recently added, but these should already be included in school safety plans. So continuing with recently added requirements, we have the instructional continuity plan. And so many of you probably remember that this component was added last year as a result of Senate Bill 153. And so all schools were required to include an instructional continuity plan as part of the school safety plan beginning July 1st, 2025. And that was in order to establish communication with pupils and their families when in-person instruction is disrupted due to emergency situations that force school closures. Now, another requirement that was added last year as a result of Assembly Bill 2887 is the requirement that school safety plans include procedures for responding to an individual experiencing a sudden cardiac arrest or a similar life-threatening medical emergency while on school grounds. And so for this component, Ed Code specifies that it must be included when the safety plan is next reviewed and updated on or after July 1st, 2025. So that means that this component must be added this year when the plan is reviewed and updated. Also, per Assembly Bill 2968, another requirement that was added last year requires schools in high-risk fire zones to include procedures related to fire safety and evacuation in the school safety plan. And so this new component, it's required to be implemented beginning with the 2026-27 fiscal year. And so this means that this component must also be added to the safety plan this year for schools in high-risk fire zones. Now here on this slide, we see two new required components that were added this year due to recent legislation. And so the first component, it's a result of Senate Bill 98. And so school safety plans must include procedures to notify parents and guardians, teachers, administrators, and school personnel when the school confirms the presence of immigration enforcement on the school site. And so these procedures, they're required to be included in the school safety plan by March 1st, 2026. And then the next new requirement is related to child abuse and reporting procedures. And so remember on the previous slide, I mentioned that child abuse and reporting procedures were always part of the school safety plan. But now, per Senate Bill 848, the plan must include procedures that are specifically designed to address the supervision and protection of children from child abuse or neglect or sex offenses. And so these procedures, they must be included in the comprehensive school safety plan by July 1st, 2026. So as you can see, there's a lot of new components that schools will need to add this year. Now, as you may know, LEAs are required to develop and adopt a policy to limit or prohibit the use of smartphones by its students by July 1st, 2026. And this is in Education Code 48901.7. And so this Ed Code, it also specifies circumstances where a pupil cannot be prohibited from possessing or using a smartphone. And so although this policy is not required to be included in your school safety plan, we thought it would be relevant to share as there is a connection to the comprehensive school safety plans. So as a result of Assembly Bill 962, Education Code 48901.7, it was recently amended and now authorizes the prohibition on the use of smartphones by a pupil in the case of an emergency or in response to a perceived threat of danger, if that circumstance is explicitly addressed in the comprehensive school safety plan. So as you can see, there is a connection to the plan there. And so lastly, we just wanted to share some resources for the comprehensive school safety plan. And so the CDE has several resources available to support schools in developing and updating these plans. And so these resources are included on the CDE's Comprehensive School Safety Plan webpage. And there's also a compliance tool for comprehensive school safety plans. And so we've included the link to the webpage and the tool on this slide, and I believe it will be dropped in the chat. But one thing that's important to note is that the CDE webpage, it's not yet been updated to reflect everything new yet. So you might not see all of the new requirements there. And also in that compliance tool that they've created, the last time it was updated was in March 2025. So it doesn't have all of the new requirements just yet. And so that concludes this section. I will now turn it over to Laurel.
Thank you, Rachel. So now we're going to go over some FPM updates, along with specific information related to the compulsory education or CE instrument for federal program monitoring. All of the FPM instruments for the 2025-26 reviews were recently made available on the CDE website. A link to the website that includes the instruments is on this slide, along with a list of all those programs being monitored in this year's FPM reviews. At this point, we're going to take a closer look at CE7, which includes discipline practices. Monitoring of this item started 2.5 years ago, so it's relatively new. And as with all aspects of FPM, your best practice is to examine policies and procedures so that your LEA has the structures in place to be FPM ready and therefore is demonstrating ongoing compliance with state and federal program requirements. The reason CDE reviews disciplinary practices is to ensure that LEAs implement equitable, non-discriminatory discipline policies that are aligned to state and federal laws. In doing so, CDE monitors how LEAs are addressing disparities affecting underserved student groups to ensure academic success for all students. CE7 has only been reviewed in FPM reviews last year and this year. In the 2024-25 school year, reviews of CE7 focused on discipline policies related to transfers to continuation schools, suspensions, and expulsions. The 2025-26 reviews continue to include discipline policy reviews and added an additional review of student records. The two upcoming slides provide information about the new evidence requests. In this slide and the next, we provide a list of the evidence requests that are new and related to school student discipline. This slide also includes a link to CDE's FPM box resource, which contains all you'd ever want to know about FPM. In the subsequent slides, we'll provide specific guidance about using the two tools that are listed here that CDE has made available to support LEAs in providing these pieces of evidence and maintaining ongoing compliance. These are the rest of the new evidence requests for CE7. It's important to note that several of the policy requirements do not pertain to elementary schools. Also, when in a review, hold off uploading records for student incidents until the reviewer informs you of which cases to include based on the discipline data spreadsheet, which we'll review next. As I mentioned, this is the first year the FPM review requires uploading student records for monitoring CE7. The first step in providing the information your reviewers need is to complete the discipline data spreadsheet, which is attached to this slide and also in the chat. The first tab includes instructions for providing information in the remaining tabs for suspensions, expulsions, transfers, and discipline referrals for willful defiance for the month requested by the reviewer. Typically, it is the month of October, but the reviewer will specify whether it is October of the current or the previous school year. Each tab in the spreadsheet is different, but we have provided a snip of the tab related to suspensions so that you can get an idea of how the tool is set up. If you do not have data for any of the tabs, specify that rather than just leaving the tab blank, so the reviewer knows it was not an oversight. Entries are required only for students attending the schools that are under FPM review. Once the spreadsheet is submitted, the reviewer will request specific student records based on spreadsheet entries. As with all documents uploaded to CMT, it's important to redact personally identifiable information from student records to adhere to FERPA and confidentiality requirements in the California Code of Regulations. The other resource for CE7 that CDE provides is the Disciplinary Policy Review Tool, which we've linked to this slide and provided in the chat. It includes a synopsis of policy requirements broken down by the aspect of discipline being monitored. These categories are listed on the slide. Additionally, there's space to provide the name of the LEA policy where the requirement is included, along with the adoption date, when it was last reviewed, and space for comments. As with the previous example, we've included a snip of the suspensions tab. You'll see that the policy requirements for 7.3, along with space to record local information about that policy. It's important to note that many of the policy requirements are only applicable to unified or high school districts. If you are in an FPM review and in reviewing your policies find that you're missing any of the requirements, it's important to reach out early to your reviewer so that he or she can help you avoid a finding. So, as you prepare to be FPM ready, here are some best practices. Review all the requirements for each sub-item in CE7. Identify which documents reflect those requirements. Check to see if there are policies and/or rules that require revisions. It can be helpful to use the discipline policy self-review tool to do this work. And as always, reach out to CDE's TIMSO office or your team here at LACO with questions. Before I finish, it's important to note that in 2.5 years of monitoring CE7, according to the CDE, there's only been one finding. So while this might seem daunting at first, it is doable with early preparation using the two tools presented here to review policies related to discipline, update them as needed, and make sure systems are in place to provide proper documentation upon request. Engaging in this type of preparation will support maintaining ongoing compliance. And with that, I hand it off to Augustine.
Thank you, Laurel. Good morning, everyone. So this brief update is focused on what we need to know as we approach the end of the first Prop 28 allocation cycle. So we'll highlight important deadlines, fiscal and compliance expectations, and where districts should focus their attention now to avoid audit issues or a potential loss of funds. But first, what is Prop 28? So Proposition 28, the Arts and Music in Schools Funding Act, was approved by voters in 2022 and established a dedicated and ongoing funding stream for arts and music education in California schools. AMS funding is provided every year, but each year's allocation has its own 3-year spending window. The intent is to expand access to high-quality arts instructions for all students, not to replace or backfill existing district funding. A key emphasis of the statute is equity, ensuring that arts and music education are available across the school sites rather than concentrated in a few locations. So an important date that's quickly approaching is June 30th, 2026, and that's the hard stop for spending for the 2023-24 AMS funds. Any funds not expended by that date are returned to the state. This makes proactive monitoring essential during the remainder of the expenditure window. In Prop 28, that funding is calculated and locked in at the school site level. Statute is very explicit that funds may not be moved from one school site to another for any reason. This is an area that auditors would look at very closely, So districts should confirm that expenditures align exactly with site level allocations. When it comes to school level planning, every school site is required to have an expenditure plan, even though it's not submitted to the CDE or approved by the board. These plans support transparency and local engagement and should be reviewed annually to ensure that alignment with the actual spending. But at the LEA level, there are some recurring requirements. First is the annual certification and the annual report. While the certification is not submitted, it must be retained for audits. The annual report, however, must be board approved and posted prior to submission to the CDE. Next, the final expenditure report is a separate statutory requirement. Ed Code Section 8820F requires LEAs to report the amount of unexpended AMS funds by October 1st following the end of the 3-year expenditure window. And remember, those unexpended funds, they get returned to the CDE. AMS funds are subject to an annual state compliance audit, and one of the most closely reviewed areas is that 80-20 instructional cost rule for LEAs with more than 500 students. This requirement means that at least 80% of AMS funds expended over the 3-year allocation period must be used for instructional costs, primarily the compensation of certificated and classified employees providing supplemental arts and music instruction. Up to 20% may be used for administrative and non-instructional costs. Compliance is evaluated cumulatively across a 3-year expenditure window, not on a single-year basis. So an LEA may be below that 80% in an earlier year, as long as by the end of that allocation period, total expenditures meet that requirement. LEAs can use the AMS audit compliance worksheet being dropped in the chat right now to actively monitor progress toward that 80% threshold each year so that compliance issues are identified early rather than during an audit. And waivers are available for AMS funds. However, waivers are limited in scope and they only apply to the requirement that 80% of funds be used for certificated and classified staffing. They don't waive other statutory requirements and must be requested separately for each allocation year. LEAs are encouraged to submit waiver requests as early as possible because waiting until the end of the expenditure period can create processing delays and also an audit risk. It's also important to be clear about what a waiver does and what it does not do. An approved waiver under Ed Code Section 8820H does not extend the 3-year expenditure deadline. The waiver only applies again to that 80% staffing requirement in the Ed Code. And even if a waiver is approved, all of that 2023-24 AMS funding must still be expended by this June 30th, 2026. And like I said before, any of those unexpended funds, they must be reported and returned to CDE. Approved waivers are documented in the AMS audit compliance worksheets and signal to auditors that the 80-20 staffing calculations are not applicable, but all other statutory and reporting requirements still remain in effect. So the main message for us is simple. Let's track early, let's document clearly, and address issues proactively. Using the available tools and supports now will prevent any last-minute compliance challenges and ensure that AMS funds continue to benefit our students as intended. And that's my brief section. I'll hand it over to Helen.
All right, thank you, Augustine. Good morning, everyone. Wow, that was a lot of information so far, right? So take a little breather. We're almost there. This is our last section. So in this, today I will be reviewing several LCAP updates and provide a few important reminders for you. So as we move on from January to February, right? February is literally in like 3 days, right? As shown here, we are currently in the winter and spring phase. The slide links to the LCAP timeline, and it's also going to be dropped in the chat to support and document and highlight where the goal analysis fits within the overall planning cycle. So during this phase, your LEA is completing the 25-26 goal analysis, which lays a foundation for developing the 26-27 LCAP. So as mentioned in the previous slide, the goal analysis supports annual reflection on how actions, expenditures, and outcomes are addressing disparities identified through the dashboard, local data, and input from educational partners. This work is a critical part of your comprehensive strategic planning, aligning budget decisions with teaching and learning data and state priorities. And by coordinating program and fiscal staff and engaging those closest to the work, Your LEA will analyze the implementation, estimated actual expenditures, and effectiveness of plans. And strong alignment between implementation, spending, and effectiveness determinations ensures that the goal analysis serves as a meaningful driver for informed decision-making in the development of the 26-27 LCAP. And at this point, you can also probably begin, if you haven't already, working on the general information section and the annual performance section of the plan summary, now that the 2025 California dashboard is available. And in addition, many of you have already updated data for the mid-year update report. So if additional year 2 outcome metrics are available now, this is a good time to update those outcomes using your completed and available data. And LEA should also begin reviewing their increased or improved services section. And this year, a LACO LCAP system will roll over the IIS section directly into the 26-27 plan. And remember that the identified needs for the actions implemented in the first year of the cycle was based on the 2023 California dashboard. And if this information remains warranted and aligned to your district's current needs, your LEA may leave the IIS section as is. And for this reason, it's important to begin reviewing and validating this information now. This is also an opportunity to closely examine the alignment, ensuring that the action descriptions, the identified student groups, and the metrics are clearly connected. If the alignment is not there, this is the time to update your increase or improve section so that the metrics meaningfully measure the intended impact of the actions and accurately reflect current student needs. And and everyone, we want to thank everyone who actually participated in our 2-day workshop that concluded yesterday. All workshop materials are available on our Canvas page, and the recordings are also available on our website. So if you're unable to join us, you can catch up anytime by accessing the recordings, the presentation slides, and the Q&A responses. The link is posted here, but you'll also be able to find all of this information through our website as well. So I always encourage you to explore our website, explore our Canvas page for all available resources, and stay updated on our future meetings. Another good news. I'm just bearing lots of good news today, right? The LACO LCAP system is now up and ready. So if your LEA used the LACO's LCAP system to develop the 25-26 LCAP, there are sections and information and the data which will roll over. So this includes your general information prompt in the plan summary section, the 25-26 goals, metrics, and baseline, year 1 outcome and year 3 target for year 3 outcomes, and all actions and goals in the sections are going to be rolled over. And mentioned earlier, your increase or improve sections, including the LEA-wide and the school-wide actions table, the limited actions table, and additional concentration grant funding prompts in the increase or improve section will roll over. And additionally, the data for the 25-26 annual update table and the 25-26 contributing actions annual update table and the 25-26 LCFF carryover table will also roll over. And I have one more great news to share. Our 26-27 LCAP District Self-Review Guide is now available on our Canvas page, and the direct link is included in the slide and also dropped in the chat. Districts can use this guide to check the alignment, to ensure they're on the right track, and to access resources and guidance to support your compliance with the requirements in the LCAP instructions. The charter school checklist will be available soon. All right, so here are some upcoming deadlines that I would like to share with you. So this slide highlights several key dates of state and federal reporting deadlines coming up this year. So let's take a look. So as mentioned, the Federal Cash Management Data Collection, or CMDC, reporting window 3 opened on January 10th, and the data for reporting period 3 must be submitted by January 31st. And a reminder that even if the cash balance is zero, CMDC report still must be submitted in order for the LEA to receive an apportionment. And the CSI application for funding must also be submitted to GMART by 5 p.m. on January 31st, a few days from now. And moving on to 25-26 Winter CONAP, the amendment and the review window opened on January 16th and will close on February 15th, 2026. This is also the final close date for the application. And the CDE's calendar and CONAP links are also available on this slide for easy access. And SARC, your school accountability report card, must be published and submitted to CDE by February 1st. So it's important to note that board approval is required prior to submission, so timing with the governing board agenda is critical. It's a few days from now as well. And CalPATH's Fall 2 certification deadline is February 27th. And finally, remember, your LEAs must present the mid-year update report to the board on or before February 28th as a non-consent item at a regularly scheduled meeting of the governing board or the body. So thank you again for attending today's MEET training. I just want to give back a little gift of time, but before you do, please take some time to complete the evaluation, which the link is also dropped in the chat. We do review the feedback and we'll use it for our future item suggestions. And we truly appreciate any feedback that you can give us. And remember, if you have any last minute questions, this is also time to place them in the chat. Our next state and federal programs directors meeting will be on Thursday, February 19th from 10 a.m. to 11:30 a.m. Thank you everyone once again. And again, please complete the evaluation today and place any questions in the chat. And on behalf of our team, have a wonderful day. Thank you.